Hi, welcome. Oh, sorry. Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation, carbon and climate risk, turning reporting into board decisions. My name is Colin Connors. I'm a strategic advisor here at Breathe Zero, and my background is bringing AI-powered sustainability tools and software solutions to global markets. Specifically, I help leadership teams to translate climate risk into actionable business intelligence. And I do that in a multitude of ways, one of which is strategic partnerships with service providers and other experts that can help connect those dots. So I am joined today with by Ashley Pleasant, and she's from Weaver, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself, and then we're going to jump right in. So again, thank you guys for joining, and we hope this is very informational, and we want it to be interactive as well. So there's an opportunity for you guys to put questions in the Q&A session, and we will get to those questions and answers at the end. Ashley, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for that intro, Colin, or kicking it over to me for an intro. Really happy to be here before I get into that. So, really happy to be here co-hosting with you today and talking about both climate risk and carbon accounting data. It's something that we're both passionate about. So, really happy to get this conversation out of our group chat because we both talk about this often and into this webinar. So, my name is Ashley Pleasant. I lead the sustainability practice at Weaver. Weaver is a national accounting firm with also an advisory practice, and that's where sustainability sits. As the sustainability practice leader, I am supporting companies with voluntary reporting, regulatory reporting, and strategic advisory as well. And so, what that means is kind of taking those non financial performance metrics and integrating that into operations as well as the strategic storytelling to get the buy-in from stakeholders. So again, really happy to be here on this webinar today talking about practical insights for board leaders. So Colin, I'll kick it back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ashley. And I had the pleasure of meeting Ashley for the first time at the New York Climate Week, and then we ended up doing a fireside chat together, and it was really powerful. So that kind of got us to today. We've been working together and brainstorming, strategizing, and like she said, we're excited to bring some of our behind the scenes conversations to light. So hopefully this will be a good kickoff. So one of the biggest shifts that we've seen over the last few years is that climate and carbon reporting are no longer being driven by a single force, right? It's not just regulations; it's regulations plus. Plus what? Plus insurance markets, plus contractual pressures, plus geopolitical events, plus pressure coming from customers themselves, from advanced supply chains, plus. So in the United States alone, right, we have climate laws that are already in effect, and others that are being implemented as we speak, right? So we've got California's SB 253 and 261. You've got New York's emissions reporting requirements. The SEC and the feds are they're fine tuning their expectations and requirements. It's increasing, influencing lenders and insurers alike. Then you've got international markets, right? You've got where companies are being, required by the EU with the CSRD, ISSB, and others. And then you've got emerging markets like in the UAE with what they're doing now in India. So all these requirements, all these regulations, constant pressure is ever mounting, growing. So this is where we are, right? So at the same time, insurers, right, are documenting historic number of multi-billion dollar, sometimes approaching trillion-dollar weather and climate disasters year after year, right? So these are no longer outlier events, right? They're becoming part of the operating environment for corporations. So then you layer on top of that the fact that major companies, think of the big brands, I don't want to name anyone, but all of those well-known companies that we all know, right? They're putting, they're pushing emissions, climate requirements directly into their supply chains, and they're having these different boxes you need to check in order to just continue to be in their ecosystem and do business with them. So climate reporting has effectively become a condition of doing business and not just a compliance exercise. So that gets us to today. So, Ashley, from your perspective, where do you see most organizations are at today, like when it comes to climate and carbon reporting?
I think a lot of organizations, from my perspective, are checking the box as it relates to disclosures for regulatory purposes and not really taking that a step further. So organizations are understanding that there are climate risk criteria as well as carbon data criteria in certain legislations. A lot of companies are trying to figure out ways to not report and think through how they are not scoped in versus this is one of many pieces of legislation that are being introduced. And like you said, as well as it's not just from a legislative demand pressure, there's also pressure in the supply chain. And I'll name names. You've got Microsoft and Amazon and your targets. They're very public about their requirements that are in these vendor supply contracts, as well as their net zero targets. And so this is, as you said, it's becoming at some point the cost of doing business. You're trying to, if you're, you need to think about not only just the ROI of some of this stuff, but what's the cost of sitting on the sidelines and not being able to participate in certain markets. So that was a long-winded response, but what I am seeing from companies for the most part is they're being reactive to this pressure to report on climate risk and carbon data instead of proactive.
That makes sense. Well, it was a little long-winded, but no, I'm just kidding. That was actually an excellent way to
Good
kick
call
us
out.
off. And so then why has compliance-led reporting become the default? What do you think?
I think this is a non-traditional type of reporting that companies have not geared up for. So we understand financial reporting. That is something that companies are used to and they're prepared for and they're geared up for. So when you try to explain that to a company that has operated, I'm making it up, 50 years without ever looking at climate risk data, without ever collecting carbon data, why do I need to change? I have been so successful without doing this. And now my accounting and finance team, I'm using up their resources
Mhm.
for this exercise. And why does that make sense outside of checking boxes? And so I think that has been a difficult struggle in just trying to think through like how am I going to use my existing team to now respond to this? And I think that has caused a lot of consternation and pause. And like most changed types of requirements that require change. So this isn't any different than when I akin it to like SOX. When SOX compliance was introduced, there were a lot of companies that were going through like a lot of internal hand wringing at that point as well.
Yeah. No, those are good points for sure. So leaning into that a little more, so from a board or an executive level perspective, what do you think's missing when reporting stops at disclosure? Because obviously it's going to create some blind spots for them or some massive gaps. And
Yeah.
then what do you think is some of the bigger problems there?
Yeah, it's just such a missed opportunity, Colin. You have your teams collecting all of this information. So let's say you're scoped into California climate laws and you're going through and you're reporting under TCFD. So you're reporting under your governance. Who's governing climate risk data? And for some companies, you never thought about it, but maybe it just falls under emergency planning. So who's governing emergency planning, and maybe climate data falls under that. Who's looking at just the overall risk and like the different locations and how they are affected by physical climate risk and transition risk. Then what's your strategy? And then your metrics and targets if you've collected on any of those things. So you go through the complete exercise, you
Mhm.
submit everything, and then don't do anything with that information. There's so much opportunity to look at your physical risk report and make changes to your emergency planning toolkit. There are opportunities to evaluate your assets that may not be operationally efficient when you're looking at your climate data. What does that emissions data really mean? Looking at trends and seeing how can we improve our efficiency, save costs, and improve our overall risk management. So I think there's just, you get the data. And as one of my former bosses said when I was working as an analyst, thank you for this, but so what? So like you have to tie the story back to the so what and now what.
Yeah,
Is that helpful?
perfectly. Because instead of just having a bunch of information and then thinking about it, it's actioning this information,
Yes,
turning it into
that's
something
absolutely right.
productive. Okay. So, what does decision useful climate carbon information mean in a practice, like with what you guys do day in and day out?
Yeah. And it starts, I'll back up a little bit. So in order for it to be decision useful, I think boards and executive leaders need that education on what am I even looking at? Like I maybe outsourced this or I gave it to my team and then you check the box, but like I don't I don't speak the language. What is that? What are emissions and how does that tie back to my operations? And so I think like for it to be decision useful, it needs to tie back to overall business strategy. So are we saving money? Are we improving our risk evaluation platform? And that's when it becomes decision useful. So I'm as an example, if you have your real estate practice and you have certain assets that let's say you are collecting utility data on and you notice that like trends over time or compared to other assets, you have one that obviously is emitting more carbon or using more electricity than some of your others. What are some implementations that you can make to streamline that and to get it online with the others, right? And so then you start looking at maybe a 5-year capital plan because maybe it's a little expensive to replace your HVAC system or kind of anything else. But it becomes decision useful when you tie it back to your strategy and then operationalize that with some type of like capital planning and risk management.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the one thing I was going to say too. Like, how does risk really like present itself in that scenario? Because that's the key. They want to
Mm-hmm.
keep the lights on, you want to stay operational, you want to check these boxes of compliance, but from a broader perspective.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, with just kind of we can look at this just regionally or nationally. Um, Climate risk is real risk. It has been written into JP Morgan's outlook, excuse me, and a number of other major institutions are really calling on corporate leaders to look at this as part of just your overall enterprise risk management. And that's physical risk as well as transition if companies are not thinking about how they're affected by potential carbon tax and you don't even have to be a heavy emitter. You can just be in the supply chain and companies will want you to report on your emissions so that they are then compliant. So yeah, just the overall risk management piece of it and business continuity. It's just such a volatile market. And like I said, a missed opportunity if you are not looking at the health of your company at all angles.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm definitely seeing and hearing, a dramatic shift away from transactional thinking or task oriented into more strategic, holistic, long term. But it starts in the moment and it has to continue. So it has to be sustainable, which is what we're
Yeah,
all practicing sustainability.
exactly.
Awesome. So, how can reporting improve data discipline across sustainability, finance, operations, fill in the gap? Add another silo. What's your experience? What are you guys seeing out there?
We're seeing that it's hard. So that's why a lot of companies
Should
maybe
we just stop now?
um,
Because it's hard.
yeah,
Good
we
luck,
can stop with
people.
that. It's hard. Goodbye. Which is why a lot of companies just take a lot of pause to get started on this. I mean, it's not something that's intuitive because it's relatively new. Again, there's probably not a lot of in-house capabilities. But what this does that I love, and I think is really helpful and companies should understand, is it brings your different business units together. It unsilos them. So you have your operations team that is used to doing the business now really connected with this finance team that's used to just reporting. And now they both really have to understand what is our common objective. Like accounting and finance don't live alone anymore with just reporting numbers. They need also just the non-financial performance metrics. And I know we're talking about climate risk and carbon data, but that might also include some social metrics and human capital metrics as well, just depending on what reporting regime that you're looking at. But bringing those two together along with someone on this who's strategic about how we operationalize this information, and then how we are storytelling this, whether it's to your investors or to your lender or your insurers. And so I really think it adds a better level of understanding just all across all of your different business units. And I really think it helps companies operate at a more efficient, high level.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. You definitely were kind of mentioning, and I like this too. I see it a lot where you see so many organizations are still planning and thinking and preparing for 20 years from now instead of just get started, right? Have a vision, have a plan, but you have to get started because then it's a lot easier to make your tweaks and adjustments with real world practical application instead of paralysis by analysis that could just consume a lot of time. Okay.
I think I'm also
Hopefully I got
seeing
that
work.
right.
You did. I know what you were intending. So I think also a lot of companies pause when it comes like they like you said, paralysis by analysis. You start collecting your climate data or you're thinking about it, and then you immediately jump to how do I decarbonize? Well,
Mhm.
that's too many. Those are too many steps. And like you said, kind of start small, evaluate like what systems are in place to collect the data that's needed. Then you collect the data. Then you start looking at trends over time to then make decisions about decarbonizing and kind of what that looks like. But companies just start feeling defeated from the very beginning, thinking about like, you're not going to be as mature as a company that's been reporting on this for 10 years. Like, that should not be your benchmark, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So leaning into that a little bit more, maybe peeling back a layer of that onion, then what role then do you think the climate data should play with the capital allocation and other resource uses with a long-term strategy and long-term, I guess it could be a 25-year plan to 2050, but it also could be like a 3 to 5 year plan.
Mm-hmm. That really depends on your industry, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. Again, if you're, in real estate, then perhaps you are thinking through how to modernize some of the equipment, at your different properties to make them more efficient, and have less of a carbon footprint. And if you're a real estate company that operates internationally, you're thinking about excuse me, stranded assets and making sure that you are up to market with respect to any green certifications, any solar installations that are required in those certain markets. I mean, all of that needs to come into play as you're thinking about like climate exposure. And it's not just the physical exposure. It's like we're saying, it's the legislative impact as well as your market demands. I know there are a
Mhm.
lot of big investors that are requiring that certain asset classes have a level of sustainability or green building certifications, or that you're able to even collect this data on your assets. So it really depends on the industry. I know a lot, the oil and gas industry is facing or looking down the barrel of like a lot of carbon tax proposals. I know CBAM has been introduced in Europe, and there's a lot of legislation around the globe that's kind of looking at implementing the same thing. Surprisingly, the United States has also introduced or proposed similar legislation. I don't know where
Mhm.
it goes, but just it may go nowhere. But just knowing that that is something it's not going away. This is, these are real um, market types of demand that are out there for this information.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's not going away. You can't unring that bell. And it seems like there's more and more regulations and more different types of requirements or loopholes or to jump through rather than things getting more simplified or even more centralized. And that's just going to put even more pressure on companies because you have, multitude of reporting requirements to do instead of just one standardized thing. So I guess that could cause even more problems as well, which then circles back to the last couple things you mentioned. But okay, cool. So that's awesome. I appreciate that. With your day-to-day interactions and some of the strategies you guys come, what are some of the common like pitfalls that you see that are out there? Maybe they're intentional traps, or maybe it's accidental. I don't know, but what are you guys seeing that are maybe some of the mistakes that are being made?
Yeah, I think which is a common theme that will kind of come throughout this webinar, but a common pitfall is reporting just to report. So you have legislative demands, you're going through this entire exercise on collecting your climate data, on your carbon data, and then you check that box and you never do anything with it.
So
I
is
think it's
that
an
does that
opportunity.
tie it back into your opening statement of okay, so what? Now what?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
And maybe
Exactly. That
no, that's
you're
it.
exactly
Maybe you
right.
can add a little more color to that, or maybe just an example without throwing someone under a bus. I don't know. Just
Yeah, I've worked with organizations that are, let's say, doing a capital raise, right? And so maybe you're collecting climate data, and you are, putting together pieces to be able to report on your carbon footprint, to be able to demonstrate to investors that you have this capability, but then are not really going back and saying, okay, now that we see these trends over time, this is how, let's say, I can improve the asset performance. I really can get an ROI on this. Like before, it was, yes, I was checking the box and maybe I'm not sitting on the sidelines. I'm participating. Let's say I got the investor money, but what are you doing at the asset level? What are you doing at your plants
hmm.
to plan, like we said, plan ahead for any capital allocations that are needed, or maybe you need to sell some of these assets because they don't fall within your strategy of attracting institutional capital or being able to get, lend or being able to get financing at a good cost, and so just kind of thinking through that, through how to then get your ROI, right? Like back to your traditional business fundamentals of cost savings and risk management and increasing asset value. Take that, not those non financial performance metrics, and apply that same business rigor. And it can be done.
Yeah. So really important for some of these individuals, small teams, even a silo within the organization to not only do their job and check their box, but you also have to kind of think big picture and help do things that are going to be organizationally healthy, help protect the business as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And
Okay, good.
I'll add to that also that it's not just, I know where our focus is like executive leadership and boards, but I will also say it's on the sustainability professional side. There are some professionals that have not operated within business, and so that's also difficult too when they're trying to advise without speaking in like business terms and
Yeah.
understanding like they can't operate like as two different entities. Like it really needs to be something that's customized for that particular business.
Yeah, I don't want to hijack the conversation, but it reminds me of some experiences I had with both global logistics management and also with industrial and packaging. And sometimes someone would make a decision to save 5% on their cost, and it costs two other departments like a 30% increase.
Right. Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, probably talk for days. So I think that's a good segue into. So now we've talked about collecting data, having metrics, having your totals, but then what does that mean versus like decision relevant risk decision making, right, for the board? So then why are enterprise-wide emission totals insufficient, I guess, if I'm thinking out loud properly, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I am going to kind of go back again to my analyst days. And w as finance professionals back in my day, we used to get really frustrated that we started with business to actuals and comparing those, and that was great. And then it
Mhm.
was okay, well, now let's do forecasts and let's compare, excuse me, budget to actuals, and now let's compare um, our budget to our forecast and our actuals to our forecast. And let's do that quarter over quarter and year over year. And it kept evolving. And we were like, okay, now you want to see it in 2D and 3D. And so when you look at your emissions data and you aggregate it, that tells one story. That tells one story. You can't really do a whole lot with that. What you need to do is look at trends over time, look at regional data, like assess things in more than one way. So you do need to break up that information in a way that makes sense for your business. Now, like I can't tell you that it's a one size fits all um, type of solution. But what you should do is again kind of go back to your overall business strategy. What are we trying to accomplish here? And I would say also kind of look to your financial reporting also as a way to structure your climate risk data as well as your carbon reporting data. And if I'm looking at things, piecing them up regionally, or I'm piecing them up, by country, however you're looking at things, city by city, that's how I would look at this type of data as well. And that should give you a little bit of guidance.
Great. No, that's awesome insight for sure. How does physical climate risk show up operationally? I
Ooh,
mean, I know it's a
and it's
loaded
it's
question and there's a lot of different things. Maybe just something that jumps out, um, you know,
a lot of
because
things
these are
jump
real
out, and it
world
may,
challenges, right? These are challenges
yeah.
people like the operators, the teams that are tasked with do this, do that, you know.
I will say, I've worked with companies that have evaluated all of the climate risks and are pretty surprised about the exposure and it not being the one or two things that they're used to. So, for example, here in Texas, it's like obviously it gets hot. We have a lot of wind and rain events. We have flooding. Never in a million years do we think that now all of a sudden we're getting hit with this recurring winter weather that's so bad. So
Mm.
as we're sitting here today, obviously staring down the pike of a big winter weather event that's supposed to be coming, this Friday, Saturday. We originally looked at it as like a one-off, and now we're saying it's pretty commonplace. We're going to get these weather events, and even though it's infrequent, it is disruptive. It's
Yeah.
disruptive. Like I'll probably be home on Monday. A lot of businesses are switching and thinking about like working from home. A lot of things that were going to happen on Saturday are now canceled. There are a lot of events that are being pushed, and so it's disruptive on a major scale, depending on just how um, I guess how intense and how wide of exposure that physical climate risk is.
So to put my simple bow on it, that's where you can see the reality. The rubber is hitting the road, so to speak, that you've done your due diligence to look at these types of events and collect this type of data, look at your organization, how it operates and your assets, and be prepared and have something that's already in place and it's actionable as we speak so that you're not completely caught off guard by it, some random event that is now repeating itself.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And not looking at it as just like what um, your historical experience, that's great. But I think taking it a step further and getting just a real physical risk analysis, whether that's from, an external source or open source tools, really thinking about it from a broad perspective. And then documenting that and documenting what those exposures are and mitigating efforts. And I think that really helps the overall resilience of that business.
So, if I may, it seems like boards are struggling with like these reports that don't translate this collected data into the implications, the ramifications, the bigger picture. Okay. So hopefully I'm tracking right. Now, let's assume that's right.
Mhm.
How should these insights be framed then? How can you present it so that's better for the board to make these big monumental decisions that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm repeating myself, but it's because I want this to really hit home. One of the so I think one of the most impactful ways to make this information decision useful and language that the boards and executive leaders speak are to embed it into the structures that are already in place, whether that's your risk reporting. At one point, AI and cybersecurity wasn't on like an overall risk report. That's a very important line item now. Physical
Mm,
risk should and climate risk should be an important line item, even if it's not something quarterly, right? Because I don't think climate risk changes quarterly, but it should be a part of your overall enterprise risk management practices. And it should be maybe part of budgeting when you're looking at
mm,
your climate risk, excuse me, not climate, your carbon data and evaluating the efficiency of your various assets or and that could be your leased assets. Maybe you're just not just you're a professional services firm and not a heavy emitter. I think it's important, regardless of your industry, regardless of the size of company that you are, to evaluate these risks and embed them into your overall reporting and grow it from there. But it really can start with just how do we report up to the board and what do they think is important? Like, what are the metrics that they are currently evaluating now to make decisions? And how do I weave this into that? These metrics into kind of the reporting and analytics that the team thinks are valuable.
yeah. No, that's awesome. Thank you. It looks like I've been paying attention to you, I promise, but we're getting some good questions, and I want to get to this question and answer session. So maybe this is a good time to transition out of our open discussion, and I'm going to open it up into the Q&A. Just maybe put my little closing remark on it, and then you could add to it if I completely botched it. But so the reality is climate risk is no longer emerging, right? It's here, it's operational, it's now. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got embedded laws like we mentioned earlier, SB 253, 261, for example, and you got supplier programs, like your Amazon Project Gigaton, right? I think everyone's aware of that by now since we all shop on Amazon 19 times a day. And then you've got insurance markets are reacting to historic levels of extreme weather and conditions and all the rising costs, expectations of companies that place on each other through contracts and competitions and whatnot. Okay. So organizations that treat climate reporting as a decision tool, they gain visibility earlier, correct? Those that treat it as a compliance exercise often discover the risk later and now they're reacting. I think we all know that if you're proactive, you can help manage it better and you could also reduce total costs. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's a great way to
And then
couch it.
that's obviously something that's going to resonate with a board as they make their very important operational organizational decisions.
Yes, yes. That's like
Cool.
we talked about earlier, bringing it back to those, business terms that they are
Yeah.
used to speaking in.
Awesome. All right. Well, like I said, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. Wonderful insight. We've got some great questions. I'd like to try to get through as many as we can. So we'll just try to do rapid fire. Just let me know when you're
Rapid
ready to
fire. All
move.
right.
Let me know when you're ready to move on to the next one. Right.
Okay,
So
deep breaths.
yeah, ready to go. All right. So here's one that came in. If executives had three climate metrics in front of them, what should they be and why? Ooh. So they only had
Three.
three metrics. You're going to present your bosses with three metrics. What should they be and why?
Yeah, I would look at physical climate risk. That's pretty low hanging fruit. And it shows, where exactly the exposure is in relation to your assets and like how we should be mitigating for that, right? And hopefully there are a lot of companies that are already doing that. And I consider carbon data as climate data as well, because that also again shows your operational efficiency And I then would also look at transition risk from a legislative perspective, whether that's carbon taxes or other types of legislation that's being introduced that's requiring this level of reporting.
Awesome. Thank you. So this one kind of is fun. 5 years from now, when we look back on today's biggest blind spots in climate decision making, what will it be?
Our biggest blind spots. I mean, I think the biggest issue is that companies are dragging their feet on reporting and getting started. I don't think there is a blind spot with respect to collecting this data. I think you learn as you go. And so I almost don't like that question because it makes companies and decision makers have another reason to pause, right? Like if I
Yes.
don't get it all right. And that's not kind of the spirit of this. I think companies need to get started to then uncover, because this is again not a one size fits all. What may be a reporting issue or challenge in my company may not be the same for yours. So it really is just getting started, and then from there, just fine tuning that messaging and fine tuning the rigor of reporting.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, and I didn't expect you to have a crystal ball. I like the idea that, it's not necessarily a blind spot, but if you aren't being action oriented and with a good goal in mind, then it's going to get a lot worse than it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you balance near-term emissions hotspots with long-term transition or physical risks? What do you think?
It it's I think it takes bringing in just various team members and unsiloing everyone to have these discussions, right? And so I think again stripping it down back down to okay, we've evaluated, here's where our exposures are. This is how we best mitigate. What is the cost? What are some other demand drivers outside of just legislation or the market demands? And then what's our existing budget and how do we plan for that? And I think all of those factors should come into play. And I don't think that it's like one group, like to your point earlier, it's not just the sustainability team leading the way. That doesn't make sense. It's not just your finance team because they're always going to take the purse away from you. So it's kind of bringing those groups together to make these common sense decisions. And this happens all the time. And I don't think climate risk and carbon data should be any different.
Gotcha. So here's a general one, asking how can I start working on my scope 3 emissions? And then I think I'm going to tie it into another question. As a real estate developer in New York, starting my carbon and climate reporting for the first time, where should I begin if my goal is to inform investment, capex, asset decisions? So I think those do tie in together. Where do I begin? How do I get started? And then we all know the biggest contributor and biggest challenges at scope 3. So what kind of advice as a consultant do you give?
Scope 3 is challenging for a number of reasons. It's messy and it's peeling back the onion and seeing more onion, right? Like it just keeps
Yeah.
going. For a real estate developer, the biggest piece of scope 3 is your embodied carbon. And I think you will start with a life cycle assessment. And we have a great team in California, our ECS team, Energy Compliance Services, that work with my sustainability team and are able to support with that. If you did need kind of some further guidance or even just like have an initial discussion. But a lot of your suppliers, whether it's your steel or lumber or otherwise, should be able to provide like some of those metrics for embodied carbon to get you started.
Yeah. My question, sorry to those that didn't answer your question yet, but my question, what role do you see technology playing, to help you guys do what you're doing with your clients better, right? Because the client can incorporate technology to help. You guys can incorporate technology to help. What kind of what role do you see, or what changes are emerging that's helping to, make the what you guys do better, more efficient, and more, with better results?
I feel like that's a better question for you, Colin, but I will I'll take a stab at it. But then I'm also
Well,
going to
I
kick
could
that back.
pitch, like, obviously I would like to speak with people about climate tech and different solutions, but you're actually someone where you're a trusted advisor. They're coming to you and you're consulting, and it's a very long-term, multi-step process. You've not had the technology, and now there's technologies available. What do you think is good? What's working? What's what, because
Yeah,
the
I
idea is to try to help people, make better informed decisions, right?
You answered it, but I will say this. I will say this. Um, um, it helps companies slice and dice the information in a more efficient manner, and it reduces some of the errors in trying to keep up with everything in spreadsheets. So it improves your accuracy, the completeness of the data, and the auditability. And as you know, with some of these climate rules, um, auditing that carbon data is kind of the next wave of reporting. And so companies should gear up now to make sure that that information is as complete and accurate and there's an audit trail. And I think that's what having that type of technology like a Breathe really supports and helps companies with reporting and giving it that same type of rigor as reporting in your financial data.
Yeah, no, thank you. So here's a good question. So sustainability is viewed as a cost and not a profit center for most businesses. Agreed. Arguments for efficiency, cost savings, et cetera, are long term and have a high capex that aren't attractive. You know more about that than I do. So, at least from what I've seen in my organization, that's their statement. How can we keep costs low and still have a strong sustainability management process? I like that question.
I would say if you have evaluated from a long-term lens, that is great. Then let's now back it up and look at your 1 year budget. What are you trying to accomplish? And what is the overall business strategy? And then think about how you can weave in sustainability where it makes sense. So sustainability for the sake of sustainability does not drive value. Now, you have to think about, are we doing a capital raise this year? Are we trying to get favorable financing? Are we trying to work with a Microsoft, Amazon? Those may be some of your goals, and that's where maybe it does cost a little bit more, but the ROI is that you are winning this business that you wanted, or you're able to work and continue doing business in California. So it's very individualized, but I encourage sustainability leaders to have those discussions with the finance team and executive leadership about like what is the direction, like what's our strategy, just lay it out, like what are we doing this year,
Yeah.
and not in sustainability terms, what are we doing this year, and then you think about like, you know what, because I think there are a lot of leadership at the top level that really maybe they don't understand all the laws that are coming into place, or don't understand the value or the importance that your institutional investors are placing on this type of data. So then that's your job. Make it important, like make the business case.
Yeah. No, and I'd like to add to that too, is
Mm-hmm.
because the question is very specific, right? How do we keep costs
Mm-hmm.
low but still have strong processes? And I think it does start with good technology, right? Good climate tech solutions partners will allow organizations to do all of the low value but high time consumption work faster, more efficiently, more repeatable. You'll make those activities more actionable faster. And then I also think you need to partner with good consultants like Ashley and her team at Weaver, and that will actually help manage your costs as well, because now you're giving Ashley and her team good, actionable, audit ready data so they can help you with the now what, right? We talked about earlier, so what? You can organize stuff, now what? And that's a good way for companies to manage their costs, get good climate tech partners with reasonably priced but highly effective systems. And I can talk to you for days about my opinions of what I've seen out there. And and then also partner with good service provider experts. That's that hybrid solution I think companies need. This is how you can help control costs today, also manage those costs tomorrow, and have a very strong process in place. No matter if you just start with one hotspot today and slowly scale up, or you just say, that's it, we're rolling our sleeves in, we're a mess, we need to get better, we want to do it all at once, you can do it. It can be managed and organized. So I think we're going to have to leave it there because of time. They are going to throw up a slide on the screen that will have QR codes so you can reach out to Ashley, you can reach out to Weaver, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Breathe. We would love to interact. We'd love to field more questions, things we didn't get to today, have interactions. The whole idea is to bring you guys information, knowledge, wisdom that's going to help you on your journey. We want sustainability to be sustainable. And I don't say that, tongue in cheek. It's true. We can't have solutions or goals or aspirations that aren't achievable or that we can't maintain. That defeats the purpose. So I want to thank all of you for joining today. I look forward to speaking with each of you, individually if we can. And most importantly, Ashley, thank you for your time, your wisdom, your expertise. This is awesome. This was fantastic.
Thank
And
you,
we will
Colin.
be
This was
doing
great.
more webinars coming up through Breeze Zero that are going to be like this, where we're going to bring industry experts in to talk. And Ashley and I have already talked about other ones we're going to do as well. So we look forward to seeing you guys in the future. And please reach out. We're trying to grow this community and to help each other on our journey. So again, thank you, Ashley. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Colin. I always love having a conversation with you. All
Awesome. And thanks
right.
everybody. We didn't get to meet, but hope to meet you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.